Hello everybody, my name is Jordan. Welcome to the Hayloft Hour, a new series here on YouTube and eventually on a podcast platform whenever I can figure out how to do that, where I will be covering horse-related true crime and other events in history that I find interesting. If that sounds like something you want to listen to, please subscribe to my very, very small YouTube channel, leave a comment, and tell me what you like and what I can do better because I'm still learning. If you want to follow along with more of my life, you can follow me on Instagram and on TikTok, both at SpottedBayProductions. I post a lot on there about what I'm doing with my horses and just my life in general, and I would love to have you. Warning, this story contains mature topics such as murder, assault, the death of animals, and descriptions of violence. If you have little ears or little ears are around, this might be something that you want to save until later. I do cover the topic of killing horses, but I don't go into detail about how it's done or anything like that, so just be forewarned that that is a topic that is covered in this video, so if that is a sensitive area for you, I completely understand, and I will see you in the next video. On to the story. Today's story is about the disappearance of Helen Brach. She went missing in 1977 after discovering that her boyfriend and several other Chicago horse industry men had been killing horses for insurance money. What would you do if you discovered that your significant other was making horses disappear in order to get their insurance payouts? I can't say here what I would do, because I don't want it to be evidence in a future case. I'm just kidding, FBI, don't come for me. I would never do that. Anyway, in 1977, Helen Brach flew from Chicago, Illinois to Minneapolis, Minnesota, for a routine physical exam at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. After leaving Minnesota, Helen was going back to Chicago for a few days, and then leaving for Florida, where she was going to meet up with her lover, Rick Bailey, and they were going to spend the rest of the winter there together. This never happened, though, because when Helen left the Mayo Clinic on February 17, 1977, she was never seen again. Helen Brach was born Helen Voorhees in Unionport, Ohio in 1911. She married her high school sweetheart in 1928, but things just didn't work out, and they divorced by 1932. Helen spent her young adulthood working in a pottery factory in Ohio, but ultimately decided she wanted more for herself and she was ready to leave Ohio. As a native Ohioan, I totally understand. Ohio is beautiful, it's a great place to grow up, but at some point you are ready to see the rest of the world and experience something other than Ohio. Helen was able to find work as a hat check girl in Palm Beach, Florida at a country club. Some people said that Helen did this just so she could find a rich millionaire to marry, and that's exactly what she did when she met Frank Brach in 1950. It was in a rocky marriage when he met Helen, so he divorced his wife so that he could pursue a relationship with Helen. Frank was quite a bit older than Helen was and had complete control of the E&J Brach & Sons Candy Company. He eventually sold the candy company for $136 million, which is about $1.1 billion in today's money, and retired with Helen. They had homes in Florida and in Illinois. They ended up staying in Illinois. That's where they had been so that they could be close to the candy factory. But now, since the candy factory had been sold, that was just where they decided to retire. It is said that Frank absolutely showered Helen in gifts and just loved to spoil her and spend time with her. Honestly, sounds like Helen got a really good deal. Unfortunately, their romance was cut short when Frank died in 1970 after a long battle with illness. They didn't say what illness, and I didn't really dig for it, but so that was really sad that Frank passed away and Helen was just kind of left on her own. Frank and Helen hadn't been super active in the social scene, they just liked to spend time with each other, and I get that because I don't have very many friends, but I spend a lot of time with my fiance, so I can see how she would feel really lonely. Helen did receive a lot of money from the Brach estate, and she also now had a lot of free time, so she devoted a lot of her time and her money to animal welfare organizations and causes in the Chicago area. In 1973, Helen was at a car wash with one of the cars that Frank had gifted her, which was a pink Cadillac. This was when she met Rick Bailey. Bailey was 20 years younger than Helen and was well known for his abilities to sweet-talk older, wealthy women out of their money. He would wine and dine them, profess his love for them, and even sometimes discuss marriage. And this totally worked on Helen. She was like head over heels for Bailey. Rick Bailey was known in the Chicago horse industry as a horse salesman and the owner of Bailey Stables and Country Club Stables. His main clientele at these stables were older, wealthier women that had been widowed or divorced and knew very little about horses. About 1 year into their relationship, Helen told Bailey that she was interested in purchasing some horses. Now, granted, she didn't go about this the way that a lot of us horse people probably would. If I was interested in a horse and I had, a relationship with a trainer, I would say, hey, I'm looking for something that is a gelding and is safe, maybe is a little flashy, things like that. But not Helen. Helen just said, hey, I want to spend $100,000 on horses. Can you help me with that? And Bailey was like, hell yeah, I can. You want to spend $100,000 on horses? I am your man. Helen had always loved animals, but she really didn't know anything about horses, and a lot of people kind of said that they thought she did this just as an excuse to spend more time with Bailey. Helen was well known to kind of spoil Bailey with gifts and vacations and things like that, so it kind of seemed like Bailey knew that he had Helen and her wallet wrapped around his finger. Rick Bailey worked alongside of his brother Paul Bailey, and they sold Helen 3 horses that were said to only be worth about $18,000 total. So they scammed her out of like tens of thousands of dollars on this deal, but Helen had no idea. She was trusting Bailey because they were in a relationship. She trusted him to get her some horses. I read some places that they were race horses and other places that they were jumping horses. So I'm not really sure which is which, but she was more of an owner than a rider from what I understand. It was said that the horses that were sold to Helen were, quote, bound for the glue factory and pretty much worthless. And when I say worthless, we're not saying like, this horse is worthless because it's not a Grand Prix jumper or a Kentucky Derby winner. We're saying that as an investor, Helen was like losing out on her money. They were not worthwhile investments. Helen had also been scammed into buying several broodmares that again turned out to not be the investment that she was told they were by Bailey. And I think Helen started to kind of get suspicious because she brought in an outside appraiser. Now, the appraiser came in and looked at these horses that Bailey had sold her for all this money. And the appraiser basically told her that they were worthless. And one of them, he said, don't even bother training it. Like, this horse is so useless as, a high-level animal that I don't even think you should put it in training. Now, the funny part, well, not funny, kind of funny part is that this horse that the appraiser said, hey, don't even bother training it, it's not gonna, give you a return on your investment, had come with a trainer recommendation from the Baileys with a price tag of $50,000. Now, I don't know what it costs to train a high-level jumper or a racehorse, but $50,000 seems really steep, especially in the 1970s, right? Am I crazy? Maybe. So even with all of these alleged scams with Bailey, Helen still stayed in her relationship. And in 1977, Rick Bailey scheduled an extensive physical exam at the Mayo Clinic for Helen. This struck me as sort of weird, like if my boyfriend said, hey, I scheduled you an entire week at this really renowned hospital for you to just go get a checkup. I don't know, that would be weird to me, but maybe that was just normal back then. I don't know. Helen was supposed to fly out of Chicago on February 9th, 1977, and return on February 17th, 1977. She was supposed to be picked up by Jack Matlick, her chauffeur, at the airport when she arrived in Chicago. Rick Bailey had talked on the phone with Helen on February 16th while she was at the clinic, and this was confirmed by phone records. That same day, the 16th, when Bailey had talked on the phone to Helen, Bailey was in Florida and checked into the hotel where he was going to be meeting up with Helen when she came down after she returned from the clinic. This is about where things start to fall apart. Jack Matlick, Helen's chauffeur, who she referred to as her houseman, important, remember that, claims to have picked Helen up from the Chicago O'Hare Airport and taken her home. But then he told some different versions of the story. First, Jack said that he had picked Helen up from the airport, they spent a couple days at home together, and then she left for Florida. Another version of his story was that Helen came home and she had gone out to dinner with some friends over the couple days before she left for Florida. No witnesses ever came forward to say that they had dined with Helen or seen her out and about during these few days where she was supposed to be home before leaving for Florida. During the 4-day window between her trips, Bailey tried to reach Helen multiple times, and every time was told that she wasn't available. Another witness did come forward that they had tried to call Helen during that 4-day window as well, but they instead were told that Helen had actually already left for Florida. So which is it, Jack? Did she leave for Florida? Is she home? Is she not home? Where is she? 2 weeks after Helen was supposedly picked up from the airport, Jack finally tried to make a missing persons report. He was told by authorities that only a family member could make this report, so Jack got a hold of Charles, Helen's brother. Charles was tied up with work commitments, so he couldn't come right away, but he did eventually come and make the report. When the investigation started, authorities did question the flight crew on Helen's flight home from Minneapolis to Chicago. None of the flight crew ever remembered seeing Helen on the plane, but this was weeks later, and flight attendants do see so many people every day that it's very possible that they just didn't remember. So because the flight crew didn't remember seeing Helen on the plane, the investigators went one step farther back to Minneapolis, thinking, well, maybe she never got on the plane. Fortunately, there was a shop assistant that was right around the corner from the Mayo Clinic that remembered not only seeing Helen, but having a conversation with her. Helen had stopped in this little shop and she was looking at makeup and ended up buying a few things. And when Helen was making her purchase, she told the shop assistant that she needed to hurry because her houseman was waiting on her. Now remember, this is in Minneapolis. Or Rochester. She was at the Mayo Clinic still. This wasn't back in Chicago where she was being picked up. She hadn't flown home yet, so why would her houseman be waiting on her in Minnesota? It doesn't make any sense, right? So once they heard this from the shop assistant, investigators went right back to questioning Jack. But Jack insisted that he had dropped Helen off for her flight to Florida and she should be hanging out in the sun with a margarita with her boyfriend. But it turned out there was no record of Helen even purchasing a ticket to Florida, let alone getting on the plane. Jack said that he had dropped Helen off at 6 a.m. for a red-eye flight to Florida. But there was no flights to Florida that day until 9 a.m., and Helen was said to not be a morning person. Now, for you or for me, we take whatever flight's cheapest, right? If I gotta be up at 3:30 in the morning, that's fine if I'm getting a $200 flight to my vacation, right? But Helen is a multi-millionaire. She can fly whatever time of the day she wants. If she doesn't want to wake up early, she doesn't have to. So why would she be flying super early, especially when there's not even a flight available that early? I have questions, Jack. Jack profusely proclaimed his innocence, saying that he had no idea where Helen was and everything should be fine because he dropped her off for her flight to Florida. There was one lead that was followed about Jack that seemed suspicious. Jack had made several phone calls to a local department store inquiring about meat grinders and ended up purchasing one. Now, we're not talking a small meat grinder to make some meatballs for you and your wife, right? This was an industrial meat grinder. We're talking several pounds of meat at a time. Jack was just married to his wife, and I couldn't find that they had children anywhere, and when he was with Helen, it was just him and Helen, so what did he need to grind all this meat for? I don't know, seems suspicious, but the police were like, no, that's not weird, the guy just really likes making hamburgers, okay? It's fine, it's fine. Seems suspicious. More evidence came forward that Jack had the mansion deep cleaned the days after Helen was supposed to return from Minnesota. And we're not talking like shampooing the carpets and dusting the shelves. There was like repainting and re-carpeting done. And Jack even had one of Helen's cars completely detailed. I mean, like, it seems straightforward, right? Like, if you're watching this in a movie and all of these hints are being dropped, you're going to be like, this movie sucks. It's obvious. The butler did it. But not the police. They were like, nah, he seems cool. We took him out for a beer. Not this guy. In addition to all of that, Jack was caught forging several checks totaling $13,000 from Helen's accounts, all written to him. And he failed 2 lie detector tests when he was asked if he knew what happened to Helen or if he did something to her. He also started to steal her jewelry. I mean, like, the guy just never quit. And then, to make matters worse, Jack told his wife a completely different story. Like, totally different, brand new, clean slate. His wife has no idea. Jack told his wife that Helen actually never came home from the Mayo Clinic. He didn't pick her up. She just didn't get on her flight, and he hasn't heard from her since and has no idea where she is. And I promise, we're almost through the hints about the butler did it, okay? The weekend that Helen went missing, Jack called his wife and said, "Hey, honey, I'm actually going to be staying at work this weekend. I'm a little bit tied up. I got some stuff to do. So, I'll see you later, but not this weekend." And then he went and murdered Helen, allegedly. Allegedly! They say that's not what happened, but, you know, I have my suspicions. After Frank died, Jack was possibly the closest man and maybe the closest person that Helen had in her life. Helen had written Jack into her will, and he was supposed to get $50,000 if anything happened to Helen. And it was also rumored that Jack kept a lock of Helen's hair in a box next to his bed. I mean, personally, I would think it's a little bit weird if, like, my own partner kept a lock of my hair next to their bed. But it would be even weirder if my significant other was keeping a lock of their boss's hair next to their bed. Like, please tell me that's not weird. It's weird, right? Anyway, shortly after Helen's disappearance, attorney John Cadwallader Mank was appointed to the case, and he got much more than he bargained for. His job was basically to sort through the will and official paperwork and accounts and things like that. So when Mank went to Helen's house and he was looking for this paperwork, he found in plain sight suitcases that had luggage tags labeled Minneapolis to Chicago. These weren't there before. The police had searched that house twice, never found these suitcases, and they were like just out chilling in a hallway or something. Like, you would have seen it. So sketchy, right? You would think that's the most damning piece of evidence, but alas, it is not. It turns out that Charles, Helen's brother, and Jack had burned all of Helen's journals, letters, personal writings, everything. Like, mind you, this is like 2 weeks after she went missing. Like, when they came, Charles came to make the report. That was when they burned everything that Helen had ever written. And they said that they did this because Helen wouldn't have wanted anyone to see them. I would be a little salty if the 2 closest people in my life gave up on me after a couple weeks. They're like, "Oh, we don't know where she is. She gone. Burn her stuff." Like, they just, no faith. Finally, police did find a toll receipt dated February 21st, the day that Jack supposedly took Helen to the airport. This toll receipt was for an exit in Ohio near a piece of land that Helen owned in a really rural area. None of this evidence, though, ever led to any sort of even trial or especially not an arrest for Jack. And part of the problem in this case was that they never found Helen's body, so they couldn't prove that she was dead. And in Illinois, someone has to be missing for 7 years before they can be proclaimed dead, and you can proceed with things as if it was a homicide. So the case went cold until 1979 when a message was written near Helen's house in spray paint claiming that Rick Bailey was responsible for her disappearance and knew where she was. Rick Bailey was questioned about this, but he said that this was probably just someone that was jealous of him and wanted to, take him down with defamation. Bailey was subpoenaed and questioned in 1979, and when asked if he knew Helen, not if he did something to her, not if he knew where she was, just if he knew Helen, he said, "I plead the fifth." Now, at least in the United States, I don't know what they call this in other countries, you have the right, the constitutional right, the Fifth Amendment, to not incriminate yourself. And so it's kind of like, okay, Bailey, like if you're not guilty, why would you just not say, no, I don't know where she is, I didn't do anything to her, whatever. Why do you need to plead the fifth about it? But I digress. Like I said before, Bailey was known for swindling wealthy women out of their money, and he would promise love and romance to kind of get into their pocketbook and do whatever he wanted with their cash. He was even referred to as the Galloping Gigolo. That's a hell of a nickname, right? Like I said, Bailey just said that those spray painted messages were probably just somebody who was jealous of him and wanted to get to him. And even though he did have a shady reputation, that wasn't enough evidence to arrest him and put him on trial either. So the case went cold again. Back in the freezer it goes, until 1984. 1984 made it 7 years since Helen was last seen, which meant that in the state of Illinois, she could be legally declared dead. Everett Moore was the accountant working on the estate, and he pushed to have Helen's legal death date as early as possible, mostly for accounting reasons, something to do with taxes accruing on the estate, and also they had been paying a lot of money over the years to maintain Helen's homes and horses and things like that, and so once she was declared dead, I guess they could probably auction those things off, and then the estate wouldn't have to pay for them anymore. Helen's brother also was pushing for the death date to be as early as possible because then he could collect interest on the trust fund that Helen had left to him. She had left him $500,000, and because he wasn't able to touch it because of this whole situation, it had been accruing interest. So Charles did get his payout. They were able to settle the estate. However, remember how I said Jack was owed $50,000 out of the will? Jack ended up not taking that in exchange for not having any charges pressed against him for the check forgery and the jewelry theft. So I guess Jack maybe made out with his $13,000 and some jewelry, but he didn't get his $50,000 out of the will from Helen. The majority of what was left of Helen's estate went to her Animal Welfare Foundation. I tried to look up this foundation and it still seems to exist, but the only thing I can find on it is the nonprofit record that kind of all nonprofits have, like their financial records and stuff, but I couldn't find like a website or anything that said that this was still a very active organization. So this was in 1984, the estate was settled, and things pretty much went radio silent after that for about 5 years. Now in 1989, this is 12 years after Helen disappeared, a lady named Barbara Morris reported to the FBI that Rick Bailey had committed fraud. She was a victim of kind of similar things that Helen had gone through and many other women, where Rick Bailey was scamming Barbara Morris out of her money, and he was using horses to do it. This time, the person who was put on the case was Steve Miller. Now, Steve Miller is the one who really brought this whole thing together. He decided that instead of trying to pursue this whole situation with Helen Brach as a murder case, that instead he should pursue the financial aspect of the case with the horse scamming and the insurance fraud and all that, and that if they followed the money, they would find the murder. And that did end up to be much more successful than just trying to pursue this as a murder case. This was when they uncovered basically the entire plot of murdering horses for insurance money. People had known Rick Bailey was shady, but this kind of brought it to light, and it wasn't just a rumor anymore. So a little bit more about Bailey. Bailey was said to have picked up horses as a method to scam rich people out of their money because, as he said, horses are easy to lie about, especially to wealthy people who don't know the first thing about horses. This is a fun hobby for them, and if you tell them what they want to hear, they'll write you a check. It was also discovered that Bailey was catfishing women in the local newspaper. Like, way before Tinder, he was getting women to swipe right, thinking that they were getting this handsome, wealthy horseman, but really he was just trying to sucker some more women in so that he could take their money. It was awful, seriously. Rick Bailey had several accomplices, and they were, like I said, killing underperforming horses in order to get their insurance payout. He got himself into this crime ring actually by being scammed himself. So he was scammed by a man named Silas Jane, who I'll talk about next. And it's weird, right? Like, if I was scammed by somebody and I figured it out, I'd be like, wow, that was a really crappy thing to do. Like, I would never want to scam somebody, like that. But not Rick Bailey. He was like, dang, you got me. That's a good one. I'm going to try that. And he got involved with all of these people, and then he ended up, doing some things that he probably didn't think he was going to get into doing. Maybe he did. I don't know. I don't know him. I'm just going off of what I found on the internet. So like I said, Rick Bailey got involved with a man named Silas Jane, and Silas Jane makes Rick Bailey look like a saint, okay? Silas Jane lived in Chicago, and he had ownership over several stables. He had an extensive criminal history, including assault. He murdered his half-brother, for which he only served a 7-year sentence. Like, that seems like a really light sentence for murdering someone. He was connected to the murder of 3 young boys. He was connected to the disappearance of some witnesses to another crime he committed. I mean, this guy just would not stop. Which I guess if you're in that deep, like, what's another one, right? Like, that has to be what he's thinking. Or he doesn't care, I don't know. So, of course, he became a suspect in the disappearance of Helen Brach because he was a part of this, crime ring that she had discovered. Silas was in prison at the time of Helen's disappearance, so he wasn't suspected of being directly related to the crime, but perhaps he had put out a hit on her or somehow was an accomplice to this crime. But like I said, Helen had discovered what Silas and Bailey and other people were doing, and she threatened that she was going to go to the authorities about it, and she said that she was going to do it when she got back from her Mayo Clinic appointment. In addition to killing horses for money, Silas also used some of his stables as fronts for other illicit businesses like money laundering and things like that. He also worked alongside Bailey with selling basically worthless performing horses for really large amounts of money and things like that. Silas Jane was also known to be so dangerous and violent that he could basically blackmail people for money. If there were horse shows in the Chicago area, the Silas Jane would basically just call them up and be like, oh, hey, you're having a horse show? Yeah, it has nothing to do with me, but you're going to need to give me 50% of your proceeds or else, And they knew what the or else was. And they would give it to him. They would give him the money because they were so afraid of what he or his family would do. His family was referred to as the Horse Mafia in Chicago. It was that bad. Jane worked closely with another man named Tom Burns, and that man was known as the Sandman because, quote, he put horses to sleep. Hurl. That makes me physically ill to think about. Burns would be called in whenever a person had an expensive horse that was underperforming and couldn't be sold for a profit or the amount that the insurance was worth, so you can deduce what happened from there. The things that they would do to horses actually make me want to hurl, and I'm not going to talk about them here, and I promise you don't want to Google them either. I ended up into that rabbit hole and accidentally started reading about it, and there were pictures. I'm just telling you, just don't Google it. You don't want to see it. I'm not going to talk about it. One of the famous incidents of this was when Burns was hired to make a horse disappear that belonged to an Olympic hopeful and also a member of a really rich family. This was George Lindemann, and the reason, I guess, that he wanted to make this horse disappear was it, quote, made him look bad. So instead of taking some lessons or getting some training or like, you're rich, just buy a different horse, he was like, yeah, no, let's just get the insurance money. Disgusting. Like, there's me, I'm super poor, and if tomorrow one of my horses became unrideable, I'd be like, cool, I'm just gonna brush you and give you treats for the rest of your life. Like, I owe you that to take care of you. But not rich people. People with all this disposable money, they're just like, I need to squeeze every single dime I can get out of that animal. So this is all just to say that considering the company Silas keeps, it's not really a surprise to hear that he was a suspect in Helen's disappearance, especially after she had been heard saying that she was going to turn them in for what they were doing. Learning about this connection between Silas Jane and Rick Bailey and all the others and Helen Brach gave him the ammunition that he needed to keep investigating this case further. In 1988, police thought that they had gotten a really big break in this case. A man named Maurice Ferguson had been cellmates with Silas, but he was paroled in 1979 when Silas was still in prison. And so Silas heard that his cellmate was getting out of prison, and he's like, hey, I need you to do me a favor. And Ferguson's like, yeah, what's up? What do you need? And Silas is like, I need you to get rid of a body. And so Ferguson said that Silas told him where this body was. It was in one of his barns in the Chicago area. And Silas just referred to Helen as the Candy Lady. And so Ferguson went and picked up the body of the Candy Lady. And Silas is like, I don't care what you do with it. I don't care where you go. Just get rid of it. And so Maurice went to Chicago, got Helen's remains, and took them to Minneapolis, ironically. It has nothing to do with the fact that that's where she came or would have been coming from. He took the body, buried it in a field in Minneapolis, and then swung by to visit his sister. That was why he went. That's why he chose Minneapolis, because his sister lived there and he could swing by for a visit. I hope, not even just my brother, I hope nobody ever comes to visit me as a swing by after hiding a body situation. That's awful. But anyway, the authorities were a little bit suspicious about this because this was not the first time or the second time that Ferguson had done this. This was the third time that he had claimed to know where Helen's body was, but he said this time it's real. And the reason he said it was real this time was because now, at this point, Silas was dead and he wasn't afraid of him anymore. So off they go to Minnesota, and they're out in a field, and they show up with all this heavy equipment, and they're trying to dig up Helen's body, and there's nothing to be found. Nothing. Ferguson just made it all up again. Charles, Helen's brother, remember, said that he knew that Ferguson didn't do it, and he knew that he was just after the $250,000 reward that the Brach estate had put up for the return of Helen, dead or alive. And at this point, Helen's brother still firmly believed that Jack was the one who was guilty for Helen's disappearance. So while Silas Jane's involvement with Helen's murder was not corroborated by Maurice Ferguson's story, he was still charged along with 20 others on charges including killing horses for insurance money, racketeering, and more. It's believed that between 50 and 100 horses had been killed between 1970 and the 1990s, and this investigation put a stop to it, at least most of it. Surely it happened more, but this kind of brought it to the public eye and really set the tone that this was not going to be tolerated. And even if the reason that it wasn't tolerated was for a financial reason, for the insurance fraud, not for the animal welfare thing, I mean, either way, like, I don't care what it is. As long as you make it prosecutable and illegal, great. Happy. One of the people charged in this case was, of course, Rick Bailey, and his charges did include conspiracy to commit murder because of his previous link to the disappearance of Helen Brach. During hearings for his crimes, Rick Bailey's attorneys told him to plead guilty to the lesser crimes and that he would give him a better chance of being acquitted of the more severe crimes. They were thinking that if he pled guilty to some of the crimes, that he would avoid a trial by jury, and that you wouldn't have the emotions of the jury involved, and that he would be more likely to be acquitted of those more severe crimes. Basically, the opposite happened. So Bailey did plead guilty to the less severe crimes and then went in front of a judge for his sentencing. So Bailey ended up going in front of a judge for his sentencing because his jury trial was waived. And apparently, when you waive your right to a jury trial, your guilt no longer has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Instead, a judge only has to find that a preponderance of evidence indicates your involvement. And the judge was like, yeah, I think you were involved. And so in 1995, Bailey was indicted by a grand jury on his charges. Well, he wasn't technically convicted on the charges associated with conspiracy to murder Helen. The judge commented that the sentencing reflected the evidence that Bailey had done so, and because this was a federal sentencing hearing, the judge was allowed to account for all relevant conduct in the sentence. There still stands an issue with Bailey's indictment, however. The key witness, Joe Plemons, who was a known conman, honestly like a theme in this story, he turned into a federal informant, and he made a deal with Miller that he would tell him everything that he knew about what happened to Helen in exchange for immunity. And not only did he say he knew what happened to Helen, he was like, I was there when they murdered Helen. I did it. Bailey hired me. He paid me $5,000 to go and kill his girlfriend. That's what happened. And he was going to do this because, of course, Helen was going to go tell that, these guys were doing some shady stuff and they couldn't have that. And so for the very low price of $5,000, Plemons was like, yeah, I'll take her out. So this testimony, whether it's true or not, gave Miller a motive for this case, because he didn't, I guess, previously know that Helen had threatened to go to the authorities about the things that she had discovered. Investigators were really cautious to believe Plemons because he had lied in the past and he was known for conning people, and it had been 30 years at this point since Helen had disappeared. But they still listened to his story with every excruciating detail. Plemons said that on the night of Helen's disappearance, he received a call from Ken Hansen. Now, Ken Hansen was another man in this crime ring, if you will. Plemons said that when he got a phone call in the middle of the night from Hansen, he knew not to ask questions and to just do as Hansen said. So Plemons arrived at one of Hansen's stables sometimes after 1 a.m., and the two of them just waited for a while. And eventually a Cadillac pulled into one of the riding arenas at Hansen's farm. So Hansen and Plemons walk over to the Cadillac and they open up the trunk, and inside the trunk is Helen's body that is beaten and bloody and battered and wrapped in a blanket. Plemons recalled that he immediately thought Helen was dead. Hansen motioned for Plemons to help him, and they picked Helen's body up out of the trunk of the car. As soon as they began to walk with Helen's body, Helen started to move and make noises, and the two men immediately dropped her in the arena dirt. At this moment, Ken Hansen's brother, Kurt Hansen, pulled out 2 guns. He handed one to Plemons, and before Plemons knew it, the other gun was pointed in his chest by Kurt Hansen, and he said to kill or be killed. Plemons was told to put holes through the blanket or there will be 2 of you in the station wagon. Plemons did as he was told, and at this point to investigators, Plemons made sure to clarify that he was doing what he thought he had to do to save his own life, and he thought for sure that Helen was dead anyway. After this, Helen's body was loaded into a station wagon, and the group of men took Helen's body to a nearby steel mill where they incinerated her body. Unfortunately, Kurt Hansen died in 1993, so he wasn't able to corroborate any of this story. Ken Hansen was imprisoned around this time for a different murder, and his lawyers insist that he had nothing to do with Helen Brach's murder. Investigators were satisfied with this story, though, and decided to prosecute, but once this started, Plemons stated that another man, not Rick Bailey, was responsible for ordering Helen's murder. That man was already in prison for a different crime, and his lawyers also said no, he had nothing to do with it. Some sources also said that Plemons told investigators that Silas Jane was the one who put the hit out on Helen. And then in 2004, Plemons changed his story to say that 10 people were involved. This included a police officer who shot Helen and beat her. And then he added there was another woman that impersonated Helen on her flight home from Minnesota, and Helen was actually driven home. I mean, the guy made up so many different stories that at this point it should have been pretty obvious that he was lying. One of his last stories was that actually Jack was all a part of it, the houseman, the chauffeur, the butler. He was involved in this crime ring now, and he was the one that was responsible. I mean, the guy just couldn't make up his mind. Like, pick a story and stick to it, dude. You're getting immunity. If you're gonna make something up, at least try, okay? One of the only pieces of physical evidence that Plemons could come forward with was a ruby ring that he said he took off of Helen's body before they incinerated it. And Helen's friends and family did confirm that this was her ring, but there was no DNA or more solid evidence that could come from this ring. Silas died in 1987. Ken Hansen died in prison in 2007. Jack died in 2011, and Plemons died in 2016. So we still don't really know what the real story is. And there's never been a body or evidence of a body found. In 2005, Bailey requested a new sentencing hearing because of Plemons' testimony, saying that it proved his innocence, and he had more than served his time for the fraud charges that he was also indicted for. Bailey believed that he was serving time for crimes that he had not committed, and there was no evidence that he had committed. The court ruled against him, saying that it would make more sense to overturn his entire conviction rather than reduce his sentence, but regardless, nothing proved that he wasn't complicit in Helen's murder, which is the crime that he was still technically serving time for. Plemons also allegedly recanted his entire statement about everything to do with Helen's murder in 2005. Bailey's attorneys attempted to request presidential clemency, which is like a pardon for conviction of a federal offense. And they submitted an argument to Supreme Court about his case due to serving time for a crime that had no evidence. I didn't see that this ever went anywhere, but Rick Bailey did get released from prison in 2017. So here we are, 35 years later, still with no answers as to what happened to Helen Brach. There's a marble monument that marks an empty tomb with Helen's name on it next to her family gravesite that she purchased. Her parents, husband, and 2 of her beloved dogs, Candy and Sugar, are laid to rest here. The home that had belonged to the Brach estate recently went up for sale in 2017 for just under $2 million. You can find it if you Google it. There was a Zillow link for it. So this whole case has revolved around finding justice for horses that were wrongly made to disappear, and for people that had been taken advantage of using horses as a vehicle to do it. And I think that still happens today. I mean, there's so much money that runs through the horse industry that it's so easy to get taken advantage of. Do I think that things like this, the Horse Mafia, still run in the horse industry? Maybe. I don't know. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to be anywhere near it or have anything to do with it. I still want to know why they let Jack go. I mean, that seemed like a game, set, match situation, right? I mean, was he involved in the Horse Mafia and like Helen just never knew? He was just some kind of undercover guy but he was, I think, in the household before, she was ever into horses with Rick Bailey. So I don't know. Was this a case of police incompetence? Or, I mean, there's conspiracy theories that Helen took off to start a new life, but she left with no money. And she really loved her dogs, so she would not have taken off without her dogs. One of the wildest rumors that still floats around today is that Jack bought his industrial meat grinder so that he could grind up Helen's body and feed her to her 12 dogs that were still in his care. What do you think? Who did it? Where's Helen's body? We don't know. And do we think that this would have gone anywhere if Helen had made it back from the Mayo Clinic, went to the authorities, and said, hey, my awful boyfriend has been doing X, Y, and Z? I mean, do we think that would have gone anywhere? Or do you think that this needed to sit for a long time because maybe the Horse Mafia had people in law enforcement or the government that were covering for them? I mean, they had to be getting away with this for so long. I don't know, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you have any other suggestions for episodes, please leave them down below. I do keep a list of them for the future. Please remember that everything in this story is all alleged and is all things that I have just found on the internet and compiled them into one video for your viewing/listening pleasure. Of course, we know how things on the internet can be, so I do my best to find true information, but it is possible that there are inaccuracies in here. Just a reminder to like, comment, and subscribe. Join us over on TikTok and Instagram, and thanks again for being here, and I hope to see you next time.